The Evora belly laughed at Earth's pathetic alien army until blood-curdling screams echoed through the stars, and they saw their faces boiled off by plasma fire. Then they realized why no one fucks with human soldiers. I remember the first War Council, back before the Evora-Human War erased 500 billion of our people from the galaxy. The aged historian Spicer began, her holographic image flickering for the young Evora students. High Counselor Zahn discovered a small human colony on Kepler 452b, just a few hundred settlers and 50 soldiers guarding a United Earth Federation outpost. We thought annexing their world would be routine. Spicer's eyes narrowed. Our hubris was believing humans primitive, even after their captain, Brian Stevens, refused relocation orders. The Council sent 1,000 elite troops to remove the humans by force. Energy rifles, impenetrable shields. We had them outgunned 100 to 1. I still remember Zahn's sinister grin as he watched the invasion force depart. One student raised a tentacle. If humans were so weak, why not just destroy the colony from orbit? A fine question, Spicer clicked. The Council wanted to capture and observe the first humans encountered, study their culture, biology, technology, and make an example of their feeble resistance against Evora might. Spicer's voice lowered. So our forces landed, 1,000 strong and arrogant as only fools can be, on that unassuming human world. Evora blood would soon soak the soil of Kepler 452b, and a tiny UEF garrison would become the most feared fighting force in galactic history. Spicer's voice crackled over the hologram as she recounted the Evora assault on Kepler 452b. Commander Zax led his force of 1,000 elite Evora troops towards the small UEF settlement. As they approached, Captain Stevens barked orders to his meager 50 soldiers. Take up defensive positions, watch your sectors and call out targets. The humans moved with practiced efficiency, setting up firing lines and barricades. The Evora marched forward, arrogant in their technological superiority. They were not prepared for what came next. As soon as the aliens entered range, the human soldiers opened fire with their kinetic rifles. The weapons spat armor-piercing rounds at hypersonic velocities, tearing through Evora force fields and into their stunned bodies. Dozens of Evora fell in the opening salvo, their purple blood staining the earth. They returned fire with their directed energy weapons, but the humans' advanced body armor dissipated the blasts. The UEF soldiers fought with a ferocity and skill the Evora had never encountered. They used the terrain to their advantage, laying down suppressing fire and flanking the enemy. Captain Stevens was a one-man army, cutting down Evora left and right, with his augmented reflexes and targeting systems. In one particularly impressive display, an Evora squad attempted to flank the human defenses. Stevens grabbed a sniper rifle and neutralized the entire 20-man team single-handedly. Enraged by the mounting casualties, Commander Zax ordered a tactical withdrawal. Bombard the settlement from orbit. Wipe these primitives off the face of the planet. The Evora ships powered up their mass drivers, preparing to launch a salvo of kinetic kill missiles. But the UEF had a surprise in store. A hidden orbital platform decloaked and began acquiring targets. Its quantum computer predicted the missiles' trajectories and unleashed a storm of nuclear-tipped interceptors. The Evora watched in horror as their missiles were swatted from the sky, consumed by blossoming atom flame. For the first time in their history, the Evora military had been defeated by a technologically inferior race. This was only the beginning of a much larger war, a war that would shake the galaxy to its foundations. Spicer's holographic image flickered as she continued her tale. The Evora Council was stunned when they learned of their elite forces' defeat at the hands of a mere 50 human soldiers. High Counselor Zahn, determined to salvage the situation, personally led a diplomatic mission to Kepler 452b, hoping to negotiate with the humans and gain a deeper understanding of their capabilities. However, as Zahn's ship approached the planet, it was suddenly ambushed by the UES Shadowhawk, a UEF stealth frigate commanded by Lieutenant Commander Jack O'Neill, a close friend and comrade of Captain Stevens. The Shadowhawk, equipped with cutting-edge cloaking technology and a potent EMP weapon, caught the Evora delegation completely off guard. In a matter of moments, the Shadowhawk disabled Zaan's ship, leaving it dead in space. O'Neill and his team boarded the vessel, swiftly capturing the High Counselor and his entourage. The Evora, once arrogant in their superiority, now found themselves at the mercy of the very beings they had sought to subjugate. Lieutenant Commander O'Neill, a master of psychological warfare, took charge of interrogating Zaan. He employed a combination of mind games and subtle threats, slowly chipping away at the High Counselor's resolve. O'Neill's tactics were as effective as they were unnerving, and before long Zaan began to divulge critical information about the Evora's military structure, technological capabilities, and political hierarchy. This intelligence, gleaned from the captured Evora leader, would prove invaluable in the UEF's strategic planning against their alien adversaries. It provided a roadmap for targeting key weaknesses in the Evora's defenses and exploiting internal divisions within their society. As the interrogation of Zaan continued aboard the Shadowhawk, events were unfolding on Earth that would further shape the course of the conflict. Admiral Marcus Graves, the head of UEF High Command, seized upon the news of the human victory on Kepler 452b to rally public support for a full-scale war against the Evora. For years, the people of Earth had grown increasingly frustrated with the UEF's perceived lack of action against alien threats. The stunning success of Captain Stevens and his team, however, ignited a fire within the hearts of the human population. They embraced Admiral Graves's call to arms with a fervor not seen in generations. Within a matter of weeks, the UEF had mobilized a vast armada of warships and ground forces, all outfitted with the most advanced weapons and technology that Earth's greatest minds could devise. From sleek, next-generation fighters to heavily armored infantry exoskeletons, the human military machine was primed and ready for the battles to come. As the UEF prepared for all-out war, Captain Stevens and his valiant soldiers continued to hold the line on Kepler 452b, repelling wave after wave of Evora incursions. With each hard-fought victory, their legend grew, and the name of Stevens became synonymous with the indomitable spirit of humanity. These early battles, though small in scale compared to the galactic conflict that was to follow, were of immense significance. They set the stage for the war to come and established humanity as a force to be reckoned with on the galactic stage. The Evora, once dismissive of the upstart species, light years away from the embattled Kepler 452b, the Evora homeworld descended into turmoil, as news spread of High Counselor Zaan's capture and the stunning defeats at the hands of the UEF. The once unified Evora government splintered. Speaker's holographic image flickered as she recounted the political machinations that followed. Counselor Zalok, Zaan's chief rival, seized upon the chaos. A master manipulator, he saw the crisis as an opportunity to consolidate power. In the shadows of the Evora capital, Zalok met with General Zaxos, the ruthless leader of the Shadow Guard. "The Council is weak," Zalok hissed. "They lack the resolve to do what must be done. Together, we can seize control and crush the human threat." Zaxos, his face a tapestry of battle scars, nodded. "My forces are ready. We will strike swiftly and without mercy." As the conspirators plotted, public opinion turned against the war. Evora citizens, once hungry for conquest, now questioned the wisdom of challenging the humans. Zalok knew he had to act fast. Under the cover of darkness, the Shadow Guard struck. Zaxos and his elite soldiers stormed the council chambers, plasma rifles blazing. The few loyal guards were cut down in a hail of searing energy bolts. The councillors, caught off guard, were rounded up and executed on the spot. Zalok strode into the chamber, stepping over the smoking corpses of his former colleagues. He took his place at the head of the council table, a triumphant sneer on his face. "The Evora needs strong leadership," he declared. "From this day forward, I am your High Counselor." As Zalok consolidated his grip on power, he moved quickly to mobilize the Evora war machine. Thousands of warships and millions of soldiers were readied for a full-scale invasion of Kepler 452b. The new High Counselor vowed to make an example of the upstart humans and their defiant leader, Captain Stevens. In a public broadcast to the Evora people, Zalok's voice boomed with malevolent conviction. "The humans will be wiped from existence," he promised. "We will reclaim our rightful place as the dominant power in the galaxy." Spiker paused, her face grim. Zalok's words were filled with hubris. He believed that the Evora's superior numbers and technology would ensure victory, but he, like so many before him, had gravely underestimated the resolve and ingenuity of the human race. As the Evora Armada set course for Kepler 452b, Captain Stevens and his soldiers prepared for the fight of their lives. They knew that the fate of not just their world, but of all humanity, rested on their shoulders. The stage was set for a clash of civilizations, a battle that would echo through the ages. The Evora, under Zalok's ruthless leadership, were determined to crush the human resistance once and for all. But the UEF, armed with the courage and tenacity that had defined their species for millennia, would not go quietly into the night. Spiker's holographic image flickered, her voice heavy with the weight of history. The Evora-human war was about to enter a new and terrible phase, and as the two sides prepared for the coming storm, none could have foreseen the twists and turns that lay ahead. As Spiker continued her vivid retelling, the young Evora students hung on her every word, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and trepidation. Captain Stevens, ever the strategist, had a plan to even the odds against the impending Evora onslaught, Spiker explained, her holographic image flickering in the dim light of the classroom. Using the colony's extensive network of underground tunnels, originally constructed for mining operations, Stevens proposed a daring strategy to counter the Evora's overwhelming force. For days, the UEF soldiers worked tirelessly, rigging the tunnels with remote-controlled explosives, collapsible walls and automated turrets. They transformed the once peaceful underground passageways into a deadly labyrinth, a gauntlet of destruction awaiting the unsuspecting Evora. Spiker's voice dropped to a hushed whisper as she described the Evora's arrival. When General Zaxos and his invasion force landed on Kepler 452b, they found the human settlement eerily quiet, seemingly abandoned. Zaxos, a seasoned warrior, sensed something amiss. He ordered his troops to proceed with caution as they entered the colony, their weapons at the ready. The historian's eyes glinted with a mixture of pride and reverence as she recounted the events that followed. Suddenly, the ground beneath the Evora's feet erupted in a series of devastating explosions. The hidden UEF soldiers, their fingers poised on the detonators, had sprung their trap. The Evora troops, caught in the blast and disoriented by the falling debris, were easy targets for the human soldiers who emerged from concealed positions, guns blazing. Spiker's voice rose with excitement as she described Captain Stevens' role in the battle. Clad in a prototype-powered exoskeleton suit, Stevens led the charge, his augmented strength and speed allowing him to tear through the Evora ranks with devastating efficiency. The once pristine tunnels were soon littered with the broken bodies of Evora soldiers, their purple blood mingling with the dust and rubble. As the battle raged on, Spiker told of General Zaxos's desperate attempt to turn the tide. Realizing that his forces were being decimated, Zaxos called for an orbital bombardment of the colony, hoping to crush the human resistance in one fell swoop. But just as the Evora ships prepared to unleash their deadly payload, a UEF fleet led by Admiral Graves emerged from hyperspace, catching the enemy off guard. The historian's voice was filled with wonder as she painted a picture of the epic space battle that ensued. The void above Kepler 452b was set ablaze as human and Evora ships clashed against the backdrop of the planet's star. Lances of energy and volleys of missiles crisscrossed the darkness, illuminating the heavens like a cosmic fireworks display. The UEF fleet, armed with advanced weaponry and shielding, fought with a ferocity that matched the courage of their ground-based comrades. Spiker leaned forward, her eyes intense as she neared the end of her tale. With the Evora fleet occupied and their ground forces in disarray, Captain Stevens and his team pressed their advantage. They drove the remaining Evora troops into a desperate retreat, their once gleaming armor now scorched and battered. The Battle of Kepler 452b, as it would come to be known, marked a turning point in the war. The Evora, for the first time, began to understand the true extent of humanity's resolve and military prowess. As the echoes of the Battle of Kepler 452b reverberated across the stars, Spica's holographic image shimmered, her voice filled with anticipation. In the halls of the UEF High Command on Earth, Admiral Graves and his strategic advisors pored over the latest intelligence reports. The victory at Kepler 452b had ignited a fire in the hearts of the human resistance, and they knew they had to strike while the iron was hot. Spica leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. Admiral Graves proposed a daring offensive, a coordinated series of strikes against the Evora's most critical military assets. The plan, codenamed Operation Prometheus, was as ambitious as it was risky. The ultimate goal? To cripple the Evora's war machine by capturing or destroying their primary shipyard in the Zelos system. The historian's voice grew hushed, as if sharing a closely guarded secret. To accomplish this feat, the UEF assembled a special task force, a collection of their most skilled soldiers and advanced warships. At the vanguard of this armada were the newly developed Titan-class battlecruisers, behemoths of the void bristling with the most potent weapons and shielding technology humanity had ever devised. Spica's holographic image shifted, revealing a familiar face. Leading the ground assault would be none other than Captain Stevens and his team, now hailed as heroes throughout the UEF. These brave soldiers, who had already faced the Evora's wrath and emerged victorious, were ready to take the fight to the enemy once more. As the UEF task force set out for the Zelos system, Spica's expression grew somber. The Evora, however, were not idle. High Counselor Zalok, enraged by the humiliating defeat at Kepler 452b, had ordered General Zaxos to fortify the Zelos shipyard and prepare for an all-out defense. Zaxos, his pride wounded and his loyalty questioned, vowed to crush the humans once and for all. Spica's voice rose with tension as she described the UEF's arrival in the Zelos system. When the human fleet emerged from hyperspace, they found the Evora defenses to be even stronger than anticipated. A massive minefield encircled the shipyard, protected by a network of heavily armed defense platforms and a fleet of Evora warships. The historian's eyes narrowed. Undeterred, Admiral Graves ordered the Titan-class battlecruisers to spearhead the assault. Their powerful shields and long-range weaponry allowed them to punch through the Evora defenses, carving a path for the rest of the fleet. Spica's holographic image flickered, the classroom illuminated by the simulated flashes of the space battle. As the void above Zelos erupted in a maelstrom of fire and debris, Captain Stevens and his team, along with a contingent of UEF elite troops, managed to land on the shipyard's surface, their mission to infiltrate the facility and sabotage its critical systems. The historian's voice grew tense as she recounted the intense close-quarters combat that followed. Stevens and his soldiers navigated the shipyard's labyrinthine corridors, engaging Evora troops in brutal hand-to-hand fighting. The air was thick with the scent of plasma, sweat, and alien blood, as the humans pushed deeper into the heart of the enemy stronghold. Spica paused, her expression a mix of pride and solemnity. Despite the Evora's best efforts, the human forces managed to reach their target. With skill and determination, they sabotaged the shipyard's primary power core and manufacturing facilities, effectively crippling its ability to produce and repair ships. As the historian's tale reached its climax, her voice grew triumphant. The success of Operation Prometheus dealt a severe blow to the Evora's military capabilities. With their primary shipyard in ruins and their fleet in disarray, the once mighty alien empire found itself on the defensive. The stage was set for the final phase of the war, a confrontation that would determine the fate of not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. Spica's holographic image flickered as she recounted the desperate struggle that followed Operation Prometheus. With their primary shipyard in ruins and their fleet scattered, the Evora were left reeling from the UEF's devastating offensive, she explained, her voice grave. High Counselor Zaylok found himself under immense pressure from both the military and civilian population to turn the tide of the war. The historian's eyes narrowed. In a desperate bid to break the human resistance, Zaylok authorized the use of a terrifying new weapon, the Void Plague. This biological agent was specifically designed to target human physiology, with the potential to wipe out entire populations. Speaker leaned forward, her expression intense. The Evora's plan was to unleash the Void Plague on Earth itself, decimating the human homeworld and shattering the UEF's will to fight. They believed that by striking at the heart of humanity, they could finally bring an end to the war. The students gasped as Speaker revealed the next twist in the tale. Unbeknownst to the Evora, however, Captain Stevens and his team had uncovered intelligence about the Void Plague during their daring infiltration of the Zelos shipyard. They knew they had to act fast to prevent this devastating weapon from being deployed. Spiker's voice grew tense as she described the race against time. Stevens and his soldiers fought their way through the shipyard's defenses, battling Evora troops at every turn. They pushed forward relentlessly, determined to secure a sample of the Void Plague and bring it back to Earth. The historian's holographic image pulsed with energy as she recounted the pivotal moment. In a daring raid, Captain Stevens and his team managed to infiltrate the bioweapons lab and secure a sample of the Void Plague. They fought their way back to their extraction point, dodging enemy fire and narrowly escaping the shipyard before it was destroyed. Spiker paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. With the sample in hand, Stevens and his soldiers returned to Earth, where UEF scientists began working around the clock to analyze the biological agent and develop a countermeasure. It was a desperate race against time as the Evora prepared to launch their devastating attack. The historian's voice grew somber as she described the UEF's desperate gambit. As the Evora fleet moved into position to unleash the Void Plague on Earth, Admiral Graves made a bold decision. He ordered a massive offensive against the Evora homeworld of Everax Prime, hoping to draw the enemy's attention away from Earth and buy time for the scientists to complete their work. Speaker's holographic image shimmered as she painted a vivid picture of the battle that followed. The UEF fleet, led by the mighty Titan-class battlecruisers, engaged the Evora defenses in a titanic battle above Everax Prime. Lances of energy crisscrossed the void as ships on both sides unleashed their weapons, lighting up the darkness of space with flashes of destruction. The historian's voice grew tense as she described the ground assault. On the surface of Everax Prime, Captain Stevens and his team led thousands of UEF soldiers in a daring assault on the Evora capital city. They fought their way through the streets, engaging in intense urban combat against the determined Evora defenders. Speaker's eyes gleamed as she recounted the chaos and destruction of the battle. Buildings crumbled under the onslaught of weapons fire, and fires raged unchecked through the city. The streets were littered with the bodies of fallen soldiers from both sides as the battle raged on with no end in sight. The historian's voice grew strained as she described the desperate struggle. The UEF forces fought with incredible bravery and determination, but the Evora's defenses were formidable. It seemed as though the human offensive might be overwhelmed, even as they bought precious time for the scientists back on Earth. Speaker's holographic image pulsed with excitement as she revealed the turning point in the battle. Just when all hope seemed lost, a breakthrough was made back on Earth. The UEF scientists had successfully developed a vaccine against the Void Plague, and mass production and distribution were already underway. The historian's voice grew triumphant as she described the impact of this development. When news of the vaccine reached Everax Prime, it dealt a crushing blow to the Evora's morale. Faced with an enemy that could counter their most devastating weapon, many Evora soldiers began to surrender or desert their posts. Speaker's eyes shone with pride as she recounted the significance of the Battle of Everax Prime. Though the cost was high for both sides, with countless lives lost and entire city blocks reduced to rubble, the UEF's offensive had achieved its goal. The Evora war machine was broken, its will to fight shattered by the knowledge that their ultimate weapon had been neutralized. The historian's voice grew somber as she reflected on the battle's aftermath. The Battle of Everax Prime marked a turning point in the Evora human war. Though the conflict was far from over, the UEF had struck a decisive blow against their alien foes. The stage was set for the endgame as both sides prepared for the final confrontation that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Spica's holographic image flickered as she recounted the tumultuous events that followed the Battle of Everax Prime. In the wake of their devastating defeat, the Evora's political structure began to unravel, she explained, her voice grave. High Counselor Zalok, once so confident in his bioweapon plan, found himself confronted by a growing resistance movement led by a charismatic figure named Zoran Thax. The historian's eyes narrowed as she described Thax's background. Thax was a former Evora military officer who had become disillusioned with the war. He called for an end to the conflict and a negotiated peace with the humans, a message that resonated with many Evora who had grown weary of the endless bloodshed. As Spica spoke, holographic images of Thax appeared, showing him addressing large crowds of Evora citizens. As Thax's movement gained momentum, Zalok became increasingly paranoid and erratic. In a desperate attempt to maintain control, he ordered General Zaxos to launch a coup against the Evora Council, effectively declaring himself supreme leader of the Evora. The historian's voice grew tense as she described the unexpected turn of events. However, Zaxos, seeing the writing on the wall, instead chose to defect to Thax's side, taking a significant portion of the Evora military with him. The result was a brutal civil war that tore across Everax Prime, with Zalok's loyalists battling against Thax's rebels and Zaxos's defectors. Spica's holographic image shifted, revealing scenes of the chaos that engulfed the Evora homeworld. Amidst the turmoil, Captain Stevens and his team saw an opportunity to strike a decisive blow. Working with a group of Thax's rebels, they launched a daring raid on Zalok's stronghold, a heavily fortified bunker deep beneath the Evora capital city. The historian's voice grew hushed as she described the intense close-quarters combat that followed. Stevens and his soldiers fought their way through Zalok's elite guards, engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat in the bunker's narrow corridors. The air was thick with the scent of plasma, and the screams of the wounded as the UEF forces pushed deeper into the heart of the enemy stronghold. Spica's eyes gleamed as she recounted the final confrontation. In a last stand, Stevens came face-to-face with Zalok himself, who had donned a powerful battle suit in a desperate effort to turn the tide. The two leaders engaged in a vicious duel, their armor sparking and denting as they traded blows. The historian's voice rose with excitement as she described the climax of the battle. In a final, desperate move, Stevens managed to breach Zalok's armor, disabling his suit's power core. The once mighty Evora leader collapsed to the ground, defeated and broken. Spica paused, letting the significance of the moment sink in. With Zalok's capture, the Evora's civil war came to a swift end. Zoran Thax, now the de facto leader of the Evora, immediately called for a ceasefire with the UEF and opened negotiations for a peace treaty. The historian's voice grew reflective as she neared the end of her tale. The Evora-human war, which had begun with a simple misunderstanding and escalated into a galaxy-spanning conflict, was finally coming to an end. But the scars it left behind, both physical and psychological, would linger for generations to come. Spica's voice grew somber as she recounted the aftermath of the Evora-human war. The galaxy had been forever changed by the conflict, she said, her holographic image flickering in the dim light of the classroom. But the road to peace was not an easy one. Many on both sides still harbored deep resentments and mistrust, scars that would take generations to heal. The historian's eyes narrowed as she described the challenges that faced the newly appointed Evora leader, Zoran Thax. Thax, a visionary who had long opposed the war, now found himself in the unenviable position of trying to unite a fractured people. He reached out to the UEF, seeking to begin negotiations and establish a lasting peace. Spica's voice took on a note of caution. But not everyone was ready to lay down their arms. There were those on both sides who sought to sabotage the peace process for their own gain. Chief among them was a ruthless Evora warlord named Kallax. The historian's image shifted, revealing a hologram of Kallax, a scarred and battle-hardened warrior. Kallax and his followers, hardline Evora who refused to accept Thax's leadership or the idea of peace with the humans, had fled to the outer reaches of Evora space during the Civil War. From their hidden bases, they began launching a series of guerrilla attacks against both Evora and UEF targets, hoping to reignite the conflict. Speaker's voice grew tense as she described the UEF's response. To counter this threat, Captain Stevens and his team were once again called into action, but this time they would not be fighting alone. In a historic show of cooperation, they were joined by a group of Evora Special Forces, led by none other than General Zaxos, the former enemy commander who had defected to Thax's side. The historian's eyes gleamed as she recounted the unlikely alliance. Together, Stevens and Zaxos embarked on a covert mission to track down and eliminate Kallax and his insurgents. The mission took them to the far reaches of the galaxy, from the seedy underworld of a lawless space station to the blasted surface of a long-dead world. Spiker's voice grew hushed as she described the dangers the team faced. Along the way they encountered numerous challenges and battles. In one particularly harrowing incident, they were forced to navigate a treacherous asteroid field laced with mines planted by Kallax's forces. The team's pilot, a skilled Evora named Raxus, had to use all of his considerable abilities to weave through the deadly obstacles. The historian's holographic image pulsed with excitement as she recounted a pivotal moment in the mission. On a derelict Evora battleship, drifting in the void of space, Stevens and Zaxos found themselves cornered by Kallax's elite warriors. Outnumbered and outgunned, they fought a desperate last stand, their weapons blazing in the darkened corridors of the ship. Speaker paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. It was a battle that would test not only their skills, but also the fragile trust that had begun to grow between the human and Evora soldiers. They had to rely on each other, watching each other's backs as they fought off wave after wave of Kallax's fanatical followers. The historian's voice grew triumphant as she described the mission's climax. In the end, Stevens and Zaxos succeeded in tracking Kallax to a remote moon on the edge of Evora space. There, in a final, brutal confrontation, they managed to eliminate the warlord and his top lieutenants, effectively shattering the insurgency. Speaker's eyes shone with the light of hope as she recalled the aftermath of Kallax's defeat. With the last major obstacle to peace removed, Thax and the UEF were finally able to finalize a treaty that ended the war and established a framework for future cooperation and coexistence. The galaxy, which had been torn apart by the conflict, began the long process of healing and rebuilding. The historian's voice grew reflective as she turned her attention to the heroes of the story. For Captain Stevens and his soldiers, the mission was finally complete. They returned to Earth as heroes, their names forever etched in the annals of history. But even as they celebrated their victory, they knew that the galaxy was a vast and unpredictable place, and that new challenges and dangers would always lie ahead. Speaker's voice grew heavy with emotion as she recounted the final chapter of the Evora-human war. As the galaxy struggled to rebuild in the aftermath of the conflict, a chilling discovery was made, she said, her holographic image flickering in the dimly lit classroom. The Void Plague, the deadly biological weapon that the Evora had intended to unleash upon Earth, had not been fully destroyed. A small sample had survived, hidden away in a secret Evora research facility. The historian's eyes narrowed as she revealed the terrifying truth. Worse still, the Void Plague had mutated into a new, even more virulent strain. No longer limited to targeting humans, this new variant posed a threat to all sentient life in the galaxy. As news of the mutated Void Plague spread, panic gripped the galaxy. Old wounds, barely healed, were torn open once more. The fragile peace that had been so hard won began to unravel as fear and suspicion took hold. In a desperate race against time, Captain Stevens and his team were called upon once more. Joined by a group of Evora scientists led by none other than Zoran Thax, they embarked on a mission to find a cure for the mutated Void Plague. Their quest took them to the far reaches of the galaxy, from ancient ruins on long-forgotten worlds to cutting-edge research labs on the most advanced space stations. They pored over ancient texts, seeking wisdom from civilizations long past, and worked tirelessly in state-of-the-art facilities, pushing the boundaries of scientific knowledge. But their path was not an easy one. Along the way they faced numerous challenges and setbacks, rogue elements within both the UEF and the Evora, seeing the crisis as an opportunity for their own gain, sought to sabotage their efforts. On a remote outpost, Stevens and his team found themselves pinned down by a group of mercenaries, their weapons fire ricocheting off the metal walls. In a daring display of courage, Stevens led a charge against the attackers, his rifle blazing as he drove them back. In a hidden Evora lab, Thax and his scientists worked feverishly to unravel the secrets of the Void Plague, but just as they were on the verge of a breakthrough, a bomb planted by a saboteur ripped through the facility. Amidst the smoke and flames, Thax and Stevens fought to salvage what they could of their research. Despite the challenges, Stevens and his team persevered. Piece by piece they assembled the knowledge they needed to create a cure. But the final piece of the puzzle would come at a terrible cost. In the heart of a long-abandoned Evora bioweapons facility, they finally managed to synthesize a potential cure. But as they prepared to leave, they found themselves swarmed by the Void Plague itself, a writhing mass of black tendrils that sought to consume everything in its path. In the chaos of the battle, Captain Stevens was infected by the Void Plague. He could feel the virus coursing through his veins, slowly consuming him from within. But rather than succumb to despair, he made a fateful decision. With a calm determination, he injected himself with the experimental cure, using his own body as a test subject. If it worked, the galaxy would be saved. If it failed, at least he would die, knowing he had given everything for the cause. The cure worked. Slowly, the Void Plague was eradicated, not just from Stevens' body, but from every corner of the galaxy it had touched. But the victory had come at a terrible price. As Stevens breathed his last, surrounded by his comrades, both human and Evora, a new realization began to dawn. For all their differences, for all the conflict and bloodshed that had marked their history, humans and Evora